Two maids notice the Duchess approaching in the bright hallway of the Duchess's mansion. Maid 1, quietly, "Oh, look, it's the Duchess." Maid 2, with a sly smile, "Isn't she just so elegant?" The Duchess walks gracefully, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. The maids stop giggling as she gets closer, sensing her calm and confident presence. The Duchess walks down the hallway, her long dress trailing behind her. The light from the large windows bathes the scene in a warm glow, making her presence feel even more graceful. Her footsteps echo softly in the quiet corridor. As she walks, her expression is calm but distant, as if lost in thought. The click of her heels is the only sound in the large, empty space, emphasizing her solitude and the weight of her role. As the Duchess continues walking down the hallway, the maids quickly step aside, trying not to get in her way. Maid 1, nervously to Maid 2, "Let's move, so we're not in her way." The maids giggle quietly as they hurry to avoid the Duchess, but one maid, Ellie, hesitates, looking unsure. Maid 3, panicked to Ellie, "Ellie, what are you doing?" "Run!" Ellie, startled, rushes to follow the others, realizing she needs to move quickly. The maids glance back at the Duchess as they move out of her way, still giggling among themselves. Ellie, worried, thinking to herself. Ellie lingers behind, watching the Duchess with a mix of concern and hesitation in her eyes. She knows she should hurry, but something about the situation makes her pause. As the Duchess continues walking down the red carpet, her long hair sways gently with each step. The maids stay behind, still giggling, though one of them, Ellie, watches her closely with a mix of fear and curiosity. The other maid, noticing Ellie's hesitation, whispers to her again, urging her to move quickly. But Ellie seems frozen, unsure of what to do next. One of the maids, still giggling, suddenly loses her balance. She stumbles forward, her arms flailing as she tries to steady herself. The other maids don't notice right away, still caught up in their laughter. The scene highlights the contrast between their carefree attitude and the seriousness of the Duchess's presence. The Duchess keeps walking, her footsteps echoing softly in the hallway. Her face shows a calm determination, but there's a hint of sadness in her eyes. As she continues down the long corridor, she lets out a small sigh, a sign that perhaps the weight of her responsibilities is starting to show. She remains composed, but it's clear that something is troubling her. The Duchess sits on her bed, lost in thought. She wonders to herself how much time has passed since she found herself in this strange new world. Duchess, thinking, "How many days has it been since I came here?" At first, she was overwhelmed and confused by everything around her. Now, she's starting to reflect on how much her life has changed since she arrived. Duchess, thinking, "At first, I was simply flustered to be in this new world." The Duchess reflects on her experiences in this new world. She remembers how surprised she was by the way people mocked her. Duchess, thinking, "I was surprised by the people's mocking attitude towards me." As she recalls these moments, she realizes that their behavior once made her angry, a feeling she hadn't expected. Duchess, thinking, "And at one point, I was angry." The Duchess clenches her fists as she thinks about the past. At first, she was upset and frustrated by how people treated her. But over time, she's learned to adapt to this new reality. Duchess, thinking, "But I've gotten used to that now." She glances out the window, her expression calm but resolved. She's no longer the same person who was easily hurt by others' words. The Duchess gazes out of the large window, watching the sunlight touch the trees outside. She quietly reflects on the passage of time. Duchess, thinking, "Has it been 1 week already?" She realizes that she's still not used to this new place, which feels foreign to her. The thought lingers as she acknowledges the distance from what she once knew. Duchess, thinking, "Yes, this place is not my homeland." The Duchess looks out the window, her reflection showing a mix of emotions. She thinks back to her origins, far from this unfamiliar place. Duchess, thinking, I was born and raised in South Korea. This realization makes her feel even more out of place. The life she knew was so different from where she is now, making the journey even harder to accept. The Duchess stares at her reflection in the window, a sense of nostalgia washing over her. She's reminded of who she used to be before ending up in this unfamiliar world. Duchess, thinking, I was Hajeong Park. The name feels distant now, like a past life. She quietly acknowledges the person she once was, understanding that everything has changed, but the memories of her former self still linger. Reflecting on her past, the Duchess realizes that she spent much of her life feeling pressured by the opinions of others. Duchess, thinking, all my life, I felt pressured by what others thought of me. This reflection highlights the burden she carried, always worrying about how she was perceived. It's a weight she's been trying to shed, especially now in this new life. The Duchess recalls how, even after getting a job in the accounting department of M Corporation, she continued to worry about how others saw her. Duchess, thinking, when I got a job within the accounting team of M Corporation, my tendency to care for what others thought didn't change. She remembers being introduced to her new colleagues and putting on a bright smile despite her anxiety. Manager, introducing. Everybody say hello. This is our newest colleague, Hajeong Park. Hajeong, nervously, with a smile. Hello. It's nice to meet you all. I look forward to working with you. Hajeong Park smiles brightly, masking her inner anxiety. She remembers how she constantly worried about pleasing her superiors at work. Duchess, thinking, I was afraid of losing favor, so I did any job that my superiors asked me to do, no matter what it was, without complaint. She reflects on how her fear of disappointing others drove her to take on every task, no matter how challenging or unfair, all while keeping a cheerful facade. Hajeong is handed a stack of work by her manager, who asks if she can finish it by the next day. Without hesitation, she agrees, even though she knows it's a lot to handle. Manager, you can get it done by tomorrow, right? Hajeong nervously smiling. Yes, of course. Later that night she's stressed and exhausted, realizing there's not enough time to complete everything. Hajeong thinking, worried, there's not enough time. She remembers how she often worked late into the night, pushing herself to meet every deadline. Hajeong thinking, I worked overtime to meet deadlines. Hajeong types away late into the night, working hard to complete her tasks. The pressure increases as her co-workers start asking her to take on their unfinished projects. Duchess, thinking, the projects that my co-worker took but dropped became my responsibility. Co-worker, asking with a smile, can I ask you to take care of it this time too? Hajeong, reluctantly agreeing, yes. Despite her workload, she finds it hard to say no, continuing to take on more than she can handle. Hajeong's co-worker pats her on the back, asking her once again to take on extra work. He tries to excuse it with a casual apology. Co-worker, I feel bad for doing this all the time, but it's because I'm busy. You get it, right? Hajeong, feeling pressured, agrees, even though she's already overwhelmed. The co-worker's words feel hollow, but she finds it hard to refuse. The co-worker smiles slyly, knowing he can rely on Hajeong to take on the extra work. Co-worker, I'm counting on you, Hajeong. Hajeong feels a mix of frustration and resentment, remembering how he took credit for her work before. Hajeong, thinking, frustrated, even after he took credit for the work he passed off to me last time too. She watches as he laughs and jokes with others, the unfairness of the situation clear in her mind. Hajeong's co-worker basks in the applause from others, enjoying the credit for work she did. Meanwhile, Hajeong clenches her fist, frustrated and hurt by the unfairness of the situation. Her resentment grows as she watches him accept praise for her efforts, making her feel powerless but determined to keep going despite the injustice. Hajeong forces a smile, agreeing to take on the work even though she feels overwhelmed inside. Hajeong, speaking with a strained smile. Yes, just leave it to me. She reflects on how her desire to please others and avoid conflict has always made it difficult for her to say no, even when it added too much pressure. Hajeong, thinking. But because I cared about what others thought, I never said no. Hajeong is given a project that everyone else refused because it was too risky and unlikely to succeed. She stays late, working tirelessly in front of her computer. Duchess, thinking. One of the projects everyone turned down was passed on to me because it was high risk and had little hope for success. Coworker, gossiping. Wow, I heard that Hajeong took that project in the end. It's basically a road to death. Despite the odds, Hajeong continues to work hard, determined to see it through. As Hajeong types away at her desk late into the night, doubts creep in. She wonders if the project is even possible to salvage, but she pushes forward, hoping for the best. Hajeong, thinking, uncertain. Is it even salvageable? I'm sure something will work out. Despite her worries, she keeps working, trying to ignore the laughter she hears from her co-workers in the background, their carefree attitudes a stark contrast to her own stress. Hajeong continues to work hard, determined to handle the difficult project. As always, she faces the challenge head-on, giving it her best effort. Duchess, thinking, as I always did, I did my best and faced it head-on. Meanwhile, her colleagues casually chat nearby, acknowledging her dedication. Colleague, Hajeong's a good worker. Despite the recognition, Hajeong remains isolated in her cubicle, tirelessly typing away, focused solely on the task at hand. Despite Hajeong's best efforts, the project fails disastrously, causing significant losses for the company. The failure sparks anger from her superiors. Duchess, thinking, the project failed gruesomely and the company took a huge hit. Manager, furiously shouting, "Are you out of your mind, Hajeong?" The manager's rage is intense, blaming Hajeong entirely for the failure, even though the project was doomed from the start. Hajeong's manager continues to berate her, blaming her for the project's failure despite her hard work. Manager, furiously, "I treated you well because you worked hard. Do you have any idea what you did?" Hajeong feels overwhelmed by the harsh words, her earlier determination now shaken as she realizes the full extent of the failure and the unfair treatment she's receiving. The manager's anger only grows, directing all the blame at Hajeong for the company's losses. Manager, shouting, "You shouldn't have taken it on if you couldn't handle the responsibility. Do you know what damages the company is facing because of you?" Hajeong stands there, her head lowered, feeling the weight of the accusations, guilt, and frustration washing over her. Hajeong's mind races as she remembers her manager's previous words, filled with empty praise and false confidence. Manager, flashback, "I'm leaving it to you because I believe in you, Hajeong. Counting on you." The contrast between his earlier tone and his current anger is striking. Hajeong feels the weight of his words bearing down on her as the reality of her situation becomes painfully clear. Manager, "What are you going to do now?" Hajeong feels cornered, the intensity of her manager's voice echoing in her mind. She's overwhelmed, unsure of how to respond, as the full weight of the situation crashes down on her. The pressure to perform, the fear of failure, all of it seems to be closing in. Hajeong's mind races as she desperately searches for a solution, but nothing comes. She's stuck, frozen in the moment, realizing there's no easy way out. Manager, take responsibility. Hajeong is paralyzed by fear and anxiety as the weight of her manager's words sinks in. She realizes that the situation has escalated beyond her control, and the pressure to solve the problem and avoid further blame feels overwhelming. The sweat on her face and the uncertainty in her eyes show her desperation as she struggles to find a way out. The demand to take responsibility echoes in her mind, leaving her feeling trapped and unsure of her next move. Manager, "For it immediately, and turn in your resignation." The intense accusation from her manager shakes Hajeong to her core. The The stark command to resign adds a crushing blow to her already overwhelming situation. Hajeong is faced with the ultimate consequence of her perceived failure. The manager's pointed finger and harsh words illustrate the finality of the decision, leaving her no room for negotiation or explanation. The weight of the demand hangs heavily in the air, sealing her fate as her career takes an unexpected turn. Hajeong stands in shock as her manager furiously demands her resignation. The intense atmosphere is amplified by the murmuring of her colleagues in the background, their eyes filled with judgment and pity. The resignation letter fell to the ground, a stark and final symbol of Hajeong's defeat. The weight of her failures bore down on her as she stared at the crumpled paper, each fold a reminder of her relentless efforts and ultimate downfall. All her hard work, swallowed by the blame for a project that was doomed from the start. The echo of her superior's harsh words still rang in her ears, as the resignation marked the end of her career and shattered any remaining hope she had clung to. The sun set in the sky as Hajeong walked out of the building, a box of her belongings in her arms. The day's warmth faded into the cool blue hues of evening as she passed by the illuminated windows of the surrounding buildings. Each step felt heavy, weighed down by the uncertainty of her future. The world around her continued as usual, but for Hajeong, everything had changed. She carried the burden of her resignation, the culmination of a series of mistakes and misplaced trust. The day Hajeong turned in her resignation, she found herself alone, surrounded by empty bottles. The weight of her decision pressed down on her as she reflected on everything that led to this point. She tried to drown her sorrows in alcohol, but nothing could numb the pain of failure and regret. It was a moment of deep despair, with the realization that her hard work had crumbled, leaving her future uncertain. As Hajeong lay on the floor, exhausted from crying, she made a vow to herself. The emotional weight of her situation and the overwhelming sense of failure had drained her. In her heart, she resolved that things would be different from now on. This moment of vulnerability became a turning point, where she decided to take control of her future, promising herself that she would never again let others dictate her worth or exploit her hard work. Hajeong, lying there with tears streaming down her face, promised herself that she would stop worrying about what others thought of her. She was determined to change. Though she made that vow, something was still holding her back. Deep down, she knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and there was more to overcome. The resolve in her heart was strong, but the lingering doubts were still there, waiting to be addressed. When Hajeong opened her eyes, she found herself in an unfamiliar, lavish room. The surroundings were luxurious and entirely different from what she was used to. It was then that she realized she wasn't in her old life anymore. This marked the beginning of her new journey, far removed from her past struggles. The vow she made earlier would soon be tested in ways she hadn't imagined. When Hajeong opened her eyes, she was in the body of a duchess in an unfamiliar world. As she looked around the luxurious room, confusion set in. She realized that not only had she been transported to a different place, but she was also now a figure of nobility, a duchess who was ridiculed and looked down upon. She questioned what was happening and what this new life would bring her. In her new reality as the Duchess, Hajeong takes a moment to observe her surroundings, which include a beautifully furnished room filled with elegant decor. The unfamiliarity of her new life sinks in as she hears the soft click of the door, signaling someone's presence. The tension of the moment is palpable as she adjusts to the strangeness of her situation, wondering how she, a once overlooked employee, has found herself in the body of a noblewoman in a different world. Hajeong, now in the body of a duchess, notices the room's neglect. Dust has accumulated on the furniture, a clear sign that even as a duchess, she wasn't treated with respect or care by those around her. This observation deepens her realization of how lowly regarded her new persona is, reinforcing the sense of isolation and insignificance that carries over from her previous life into this new world. As the Duchess looks around her room, she notices that the bed is still unmade, reinforcing her realization that she's not respected in this household. Even the basics, like tidying her bed, are neglected, reflecting the disregard others have for her, even in her new life. This moment deepens her understanding of her current situation and highlights the loneliness and insignificance she feels. As the Duchess lies down on the bed, feeling the soft sheets beneath her, she begins to drift into her thoughts. The sunlight filters gently through the room, creating a serene yet melancholic atmosphere. The quiet of the room, combined with the dust that settled on the furniture, further deepens her sense of isolation. This moment serves as a reflection of her internal state, lonely, forgotten, and longing for something more, even though she's surrounded by luxury. As the Duchess lies on her bed, she reflects on her current situation. Despite her high status, she feels deeply isolated, even ostracized by the maids and stewards who serve her. This realization highlights the disconnect between her title and the way she is treated, emphasizing the loneliness and lack of respect she faces in her daily life. This introspective moment underscores her vulnerability and the challenges of her position within the household. The Duchess reflects on her life, feeling deeply hurt by how she's treated by those around her. Despite holding the title of Duchess, she feels like she doesn't receive the respect or treatment that should come with it. Her maids mock her behind her back, adding to her sense of isolation and worthlessness. This moment underscores the harsh reality she faces, where her status doesn't protect her from cruelty or loneliness. The Duchess reflects on her recent decision to stop worrying about what others think of her. However, despite her resolve, she's still haunted by her current situation and the way she's being treated, which continues to weigh heavily on her mind. This moment emphasizes the inner conflict between her desire to change and the reality of her circumstances. The Duchess, now aware that she has somehow become Chloe Battenberg, is struggling to comprehend her new reality. Overwhelmed with frustration, she starts to scratch her head in distress, realizing she's trapped in the body and life of the ridiculed Duchess. This moment marks a significant point of confusion and desperation as she comes to terms with her unexpected fate. The Duchess, now stuck in Chloe Battenberg's body, continues to struggle with her situation. She is overwhelmed by her new reality, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief as she tries to process what's happening. Her physical discomfort, as seen in her actions, mirrors her inner turmoil as she attempts to come to terms with this drastic change. Hajeong Park, now inhabiting the body of Duchess Chloe Battenberg, is overwhelmed by the absurdity of her situation. She screams out in frustration, calling her new life crappy. This moment represents the peak of her existential crisis, as she realizes that this is the greatest challenge she has ever faced in her 28 years of life. Trapped in a role she never asked for, she must now navigate the complexities of being a duchess in an unfamiliar world.
The story takes a thrilling turn as Hajeong Park grapples with her new reality as Duchess Chloe Battenberg. How will she navigate a world where nothing is as it seems, and every decision could change her fate forever? Will she be able to rise above the challenges, or will this unfamiliar life consume her?
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated.
To be continued.